So let's talk about the metals. I think this is something that a lot of people...
Yeah, it's become, unfortunately, contentious, controversial. But we do know that mercury is probably one of the most toxic elements on a weight basis.
Yeah.
And in terms of the consciousness, the awareness, I think it's could be... It's not what it needs to be. In other words, 40% of our mercury exposure is from breathing, from the coal-fired power plants. Thousands of tons of coal, there is some mercury that gets into the air, and the rain falls down and becomes biological forms, ethyl and methyl mercury, which get absorbed. So we don't recommend stopping breathing, but when I test people, anyone that's eating fish more than 2 times a week will have elevated levels. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the best way to monitor an individual, I think, is a challenge test. Okay. It's very safe. I've not seen a problem. We use DMSA, which is Chemet, which is FDA approved for treating lead. The way it works, our exposures are not going to be toxic dump exposures. They're small, microscopic levels, millions of a gram. And when it gets into the system, your body removes it from the bloodstream. It's trying to put it out of the way. And it's stored in bone, spleen, brain to get it out of the way. So just a blood test, unless you've had recent exposure, is not going to be helpful. I do explain it to patients because it can be confusing. Like if you go out at 12 o'clock midnight and you look on the roads, there are no cars there. Where are the cars? They're in the garage. So the challenge test looks in the garages to pull out what you can't see in the bloodstream.
Great analogy.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Otherwise, we can measure oxidative stress, which can relate to it. There are some real good advances in the testing for DNA, oxidized DNA, 8-hydroxy-2-deoxyguanosine. It's very simple to measure in the first morning urine, and that will look at oxidative DNA, which I think a lot of the kids are under tremendous oxidative stress that's being missed. But the heavy metals, of course, are across the spectrum. Arsenic, that recent quote scare about rice containing it. Yeah. Any house built before 1980 is going to have lead paint in it. There's an interesting story I'll mention for your listeners because it's a sad commentary, but Herbert Needleman was a researcher at Harvard. And he found out in the early 70s that the higher the lead, the lower the IQ.
Oh, wow.
It was very clear correlation. And the lead industry at that time was the battery manufacturers launched a huge smear campaign against him. He shut down his lab for 3 years. Wow. When his able to practice, he was vindicated. But it's a little scary because it almost didn't get to see the light of day, the dangers of lead. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, it's taken for granted.
Sure.
And it's also our knowledge base. When I was a student, we considered a level of 40 safe. Then it was dropped to 20. Then it was dropped to 10. Then it was dropped to 5.
Wow.
So, which is most labs cannot measure below 5 or 3, depending on the lab. So we still know there are toxic effects at that level. Mm-hmm. So that's my concern about what we're doing. I have an article I wrote I can share with you if you want to put on your website.
Sure.
About environment and autism, but understanding this whole connection that our systems are very sensitive, that it's all biology that's being affected. You mentioned my chart on the wall.
Yeah, we'll show that after. That's a great chart.
But what I'd like to mention is that every biological life form on the planet has the Krebs cycle, has the same biochemistry. If you went back to the dinosaurs, they could go on that chart. Everything alive biologically will map to that same chart. And if you go to one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, the hot sulfur vents 3 miles below, the bacteria use the Krebs cycle to get in reverse for synthesis. We run it for energy. So to me, that's what I look at, is that the big picture, fundamental causes, and that we're so many critical control points we're disrupting with our modern living. Mm-hmm. So that said, the good news is it's remediable, easy to remediate heavy metals. That could be, which really works well for the kids, Epsom salt baths. Very simple formula. For every 6 ounces of bath water, 1 cup of Epsom salt, half a cup of baking soda. That'll help increase the detox and keep the skin from drying out right before bed. So that's magnesium and sulfur, is the Epsom salts. So it helps the detox and helps the kids relax. And there's a lot of magnesium deficiency. The other good thing about the heavy metal testing is you can tell the healthy minerals because the chelator DMSA will bind all cations with a 2+ positive charge. So you'll see your magnesium levels and your vanadium and chromium. So you can look at the trace minerals and the toxic metals, and we can see many kids have low healthy minerals because the body will preferentially absorb the healthy minerals. And right below calcium on the periodic table is lead. So if calcium's there, the body will take up the calcium rather than the lead.
I see.
And vice versa. So making sure the essential minerals are healthy. But the good news with the comprehensive program, you can reverse the heavy metal toxic overload. High-dose vitamin C is also helpful there because it will help the body get rid of the toxins. And not just heavy metals, but pollutants and pesticides, plasticizers. You can stop me if I'm going on.
No, that's great. I would love to talk more about minimizing exposure. Any tidbits that you can share with us or testing the home?
Yeah, no, that's, of course, a long list. I do work with families. I don't want you going crazy and doing all this tonight. I can give you some good resources that I use for patients that will list everything from water filters to non-toxic pest repellents to cleaners to water filters to cosmetics. I really feel having it, well, now in 20s by the daughter, that cosmetics and the lead association. So I think with a little effort, the parents can find out what things are safest to use. And but practically speaking, I do recommend no plastic, sorting everything in glass, trying to keep up the healthy minerals because that can block the toxic ones. Moderate levels of ascorbate can really be helpful.
Oral.
Just oral, yeah.
Okay.
And then really taking the time to research what's in the ingredients.
Of cosmetics or food or both?
All the above.
Okay.
And then the Environmental Working Group, you may have heard, has their Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen, where it's worth spending the money. But food is our biggest source, I would say.
You mentioned the elimination diet. Do you want to describe that in a little depth so that folks, if they haven't done that or don't know about that, can learn more?
Sure. I often say to patients, I don't want you eating wheat, dairy, citrus, soy, corn, chocolate, artificial colors, preservatives. So I usually slow that down. I just want to get their attention. But wheat and dairy are the big ones. Corn, GMO. You may have spoken with other scientists, physicians about GMO, but I do think it's a huge mistake. The argument's given, that genetics doesn't modify the human cells, but it allows higher levels of herbicides and pesticides, which then are residues which do disrupt our own gut bacteria. So really good work by Dr. Seneff at MIT, if anyone's interested in really documenting the adverse effects of GMOs. But the whole corn question, we find that's almost as problematic as wheat. And then I do make it comprehensive of the citrus and the soy, colorings, preservatives, sugars.
And chocolate.
Chocolate, we do find for many kids that's just too disrupting to their systems. The Autism Research Institute has been keeping parent reports since the 70s. They have like 30,000 parent reports. In terms of adverse reactions, chocolate's one of the highest. So for adults, we can be a little more selective. But for the kids, chocolate's definitely up there as a problem. I also point out that you can react to food in many different ways. There's no one way. There's no one blood test. I think some of that is misguided. People do like an IgG testing, and everyone shows up with dairy and wheat. But I think that's more gut permeability, showing but those are often protective antibodies, those IgG subclass 4 antibodies. So it's a challenge, but I'm fortunate, and most people I see want to make these changes. It's not like I'm seeing from as part of a insurance plan or just having to get a office visit, but they're really interested because it's not working for most of us. The reality is when it affects us directly is when we will pay attention. As you know, the rates of ADHD and autism have been going up every year. When I was a medical student, it was 1 in 10,000. And now it's 1 in 52, and we're saying we've missed it. I mean, you have to. I mean, as we know, physicians in the previous century were much better clinicians. See, someone did the calculations to be like 300 million kids were missed.
Yeah.
Before the first case of autism by Leo Kanner, psychiatrist at Hopkins, published 11 cases in 1943 that he had seen. Interestingly, 4 or 5 of those parents of the kids were professionals who worked with Mercury fungicides. So it's like, how do you collect these nuts, Mike? You know what I'm saying? It's to us, it's pretty obvious, like something's going on here.
Right.
What's your experience with that? I mean, that's...
Well, just to clarify what I hear you saying, it's not that we're better at diagnosing it. The prevalence is increasing without a doubt.
Yeah, the best studies would say, and I can show you those, been about 3 in the past 5 years, that about 1/3 of the increases of diagnosis might be more awareness and diagnostic substitution, but clearly 2/3 is a real increase. And in the past 3 years, if you look at the studies, associations of autism with moms taking antidepressants during pregnancy, moms taking Tylenol during pregnancy, living near freeways, using on your dog, using flea shampoos during second trimester. Very good studies in California. Moms who live within 2/3 of a mile of the agricultural fields with the highest poundage. Pesticides had more than double risk of having autism during if they were exposed during second trimester. San Francisco's measured air pollution levels. Here at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, just another study showing air pollution correlated. So it's getting to be a long list. And this is the challenge because it's not a one-size-fits-all diagnosis. For one kid, it could be 5 things that's affecting them, that's affected their neurodevelopment, probably in utero. For another kid, it could be 5 different things. For another kid, it could be 5 different things. So it's not going to be the single variable, placebo-controlled, double-blind study.
Right.
It just won't work that way.
Right. Yeah, multifactorial. Okay, so we talked about the diet. We talked about using minerals to offset some of the heavy metals. Anything for pesticides, plastics, and different petrochemicals that you find to be effective? Yeah,
well, one, there's some good testing out now that can actually measure those, and you're going to give you some idea if you're suspicious. For an adult, the equivalent of 2,000 milligrams of ascorbate will actually help your body detoxify. There you can minimize exposures as much as possible. We're talking about plastics, chemicals. Most of those toxins, pollutants, BPAs, bisphenols are fat soluble, so stored in the fat. So a fat detox with saunas or a detox where you're going to mobilize your fat will work well. So that combination.
Really good. Okay. That's cool. Now, what about IV therapies for some of the metals and these other compounds?
IVs for chelation, but using the suppositories and the oral. So I haven't seen that as necessary.
The IV, you haven't found it for children?
Yeah.
Okay. So
now, the glutathione can be helpful IV because probably the whole detox.
Sure.
And it's again, I always try and get back to basics. People don't realize that what's the highest concentration in each cell in your body on a millimolar basis?
Sulfur. Yeah.
Glutathione. And ascorbate. They're like between 1 and 10 millimolar. So nature knew something. Most of the time, you don't need you can have effective treatments without the IVs. We use a pulsing cycle of DMSA, usually orally, and then also support with glutathione, either topical or high dose vitamin C. Interestingly, it's I don't think well known, but vitamin C will raise glutathione more than glutathione. There are some genetic conditions where children are born with glutathione synthase deficiency.
Okay.
If it's real severe, you're not going to survive.
Yeah.
But they found that comparing NAC, which is a form of cysteine, to giving vitamin C raised glutathione more than NAC because they have overlapping metabolic pathways. So the vitamin C can salvage the glutathione.
Yeah.
So that's the good news. for the metals can be done orally.
Yeah, and relatively low toxicity, maybe a little, bowel issues, but
almost none. I mean, it's very, very safe. It's available over the counter now, the DMSA actually. I think it's a little harder to get. Probably was a good thing the FDA moved in. I think it was too available, but it's still available by prescription.
Sure. Now, for these children, what do you do for the heavy metals? Do you do suppositories as well, or low-dose DMSA? People are concerned with that. What do you recommend?
Well, so far, I did, for the past 10 years, just working with oral.
Okay.
It's always been effective if you get the healthy minerals, clean up the diet, give the support, monitor it. I've never seen one not come down.